So at my first apartment, you had to be vetted through the jail in order to become a patrol deputy. I started in the jail when I was 20 and served a little over a year as a jailer before being transferred to the patrol division and sent to the academy. The jail in question was built in the 60s or 70s and was falling apart when I started working there. I mean, I can only imagine what condition it's in today. It was a small jail with 3 housing blocks and held a max capacity of roughly 60 inmates. In my first few weeks that I was there, I was put with a senior jailer so they could show me the ropes and all that. The standards for working in a detention facility at the time were fairly lax, to say the least, so anyone reading this who has worked or currently works in detention, there will probably be a few what the F moments in this story when it comes to how we did things. Before I started the night shift portion of my training, I had several employees tell me the story of a jailer who was attacked by something in the booth, the control room where we were stationed. The story was that the jailer was working on paperwork late at night after all the inmates were locked down when he just kept feeling something brush his neck. After he felt it a few times, he turned around and saw a dark humanoid figure perched on the shelf behind him. As he stood, the figure supposedly jumped at him, causing the jailer to run down the steps, out the door of the booth, and then out of the corridor to the booking room. The dispatcher, who was one room over at the station, saw him and then supposedly called an ambulance because he was unable to speak. The whole incident was allegedly caught on camera, but nobody knew where the footage was. To be honest, I didn't believe the story one bit, and I brushed it off as a trick that they play on the rookies or something. But once my training was completed, I was placed on the night shift by myself too. After several weeks of working on my own, I became comfortable being the only one on duty in the jail too. I was even at the point where I would play checkers or cards with inmates if they were awake after lockdown. But once everyone was asleep in their cells, I had done my watch tours and I would go to the booth, shut the heavy metal door and turn on the old TV that we had and just kick back. I was going to college part-time during the day at the time, so if it had been slow and no one had caused any problems, I would set an alarm on my phone for the next hour too and take a nap. It was surprisingly accepted behavior in that jail as long as you did your hourly checks. But one night I did my checks and set my alarm for 2 a.m, checked the control panel to make sure that all the doors were secure and locked, and then dozed off as I had done many times before. But this time, I woke after what felt like maybe 30 minutes to my inmate worker, who had stayed up late to finish his laundry, pounding on the plexiglass window to the booth door. Startled, I jumped up, unlocked the door with my key, and asked what had happened. But the trustee told me that he had heard screaming in one of the blocks. I ran to each cell block and was alarmed to find every door had been unlocked. I shined my light in each cell and confirmed that everyone was asleep though, and where they were supposed to be, and quietly locked the doors. When I found that everyone was alive and well, I returned to the booth to find out what had happened. Upon looking at the control panel, every door in the cell blocks had been unlocked manually too. This was obviously a strange experience, but as I said, it was an old jail and the control panel had definitely seen better days. I chalked it up as an electrical malfunction and the scream the trustee heard as an overactive imagination. Morning came and all of the inmates emerged from their cells to get breakfast, and none of them appeared to have been injured or complained of anything happening in the night. The next few months go by relatively well, with nothing worthy of mention occurring again, and one morning around 5 a.m, my trustee was sitting on the steps of the booth, just keeping me company as he drank our coffee, and we were preparing for morning med call and all that, and as I was finishing my paperwork, I caught a glimpse of someone walking around in one of the cell blocks through the booth window. Annoyed at the thought that someone had managed to get out of their cell, I looked at the control panel to find that every door was still locked and secure. I looked back through the window and I saw a short brown-haired man with a short brown beard just wearing an orange inmate uniform slowly walking around the block with his head down. He made the second lap and walked behind a pillar and then didn't appear on the other side. I popped the block door from the control panel, exited the booth, and then stormed into the block ready to chew this guy out, and when I entered, there was nobody there. I walked around the block, shone my light in every cell, and checked every door, and checked in the showers, and even under every table, and every door was secure, and no one was out of their cell. I looked at my trustee and I could tell that he was just as confused as I was, and he told me that he saw the guy too. At breakfast, I looked at each inmate as they walked up to see if the one that we had seen in the cell block was among them. But surprisingly, no one came close to matching the description. That morning, I brought it up to one of the dispatchers who had worked there for 20 years, and I described to her the man that I saw. Without a word, she pulled out the calendar, pointed to the date, and said, "Yep, that's him." Surely, she saw the look of confusion on my face because she laughed and told me what she meant. She said that the description of the man that I saw matched that of a man who had hung himself in that cell block several years back on that day. She said that he was a repeat customer, as we like to call repeat offenders, and was always hired as a trustee due to his work ethic and good behavior. She said the last time that he was brought in, he was just a different man, fighting with the jailers and other inmates, talking out of his head and just acting absolutely insane. She went on to say that one night the man took a sheet, wrapped one end around the door of the food slot and the other around his neck, and that was the end of him. The dispatcher claimed the spirit of the man was the one haunting the jail and the one who had attacked the jailer several years back too. And after hearing that, I began to believe that there was something more going on here. As time passed, too, I experienced several odd occurrences, including office chairs just spinning on their own, catching a glimpse of someone looking through the booth window when no one was out there, and shadows moving across walls, too. Inmates would sometimes report seeing someone in orange walking past their cells in the middle of the night, and a select unfortunate few said that they awoke to a third inmate in their two-man cell just watching them as they slept. I later met and befriended the guy who had been attacked by the entity too, and shortly after the incident, he quit the jail and went to work for another police department in the county. He refused to talk about the incident too, but would say that it wasn't a joke. When we attempted to poke fun at him about the incident, just in jest, he would become visibly upset too and just would walk away. Everything in this account could be explained away by electrical malfunctions, sleep deprivation, and just a number of other contributing factors, I know. But that being said, there are certainly some things that cannot be explained so easily. So, this is a story from my mum. Her uncle passed away in the 9/11 attack, and the day it happened, my mum's aunt, his wife, was a total wreck because she hadn't heard from her husband yet, and she knew that he was working there that day. One of our neighbours gave her a call the next morning and said, "Oh, Mary, I'm so happy John made it." And Mary, which is his wife, said, "What do you mean?" "No, he hasn't called me yet, and I actually don't think he's alive." And the neighbour sounded really confused and paused for a second. And then she says, "Huh? I saw him walk into the house this morning." The neighbour claims that she saw John walk right into the house with a suit on and his briefcase and everything. But he obviously passed away. This story, it still really creeps me out, and the whole thing just it doesn't sit well with me. This is something that my grandma told me. So it was summer in the late 70s, and my grandpa was stationed in California, while my grandma, mum, and uncle were living in Oklahoma. My grandma and great-grandpa decided to take a trip with the kids to visit my grandpa in California too. They made it there safely and had a really good time while there, and the morning they left, my great-grandpa called my great-grandma back in Oklahoma to let her know that they were about to hit the road. It was about a 3-day drive, taking the scenic route and stopping to sleep at rest stops and whatnot, and it was a normal trip, and my mum and her younger brother playing in the back seat and whatnot, and they made it to New Mexico and were only about 8 hours away from home when they were suddenly hit by a freak blizzard. They could barely see where they were going, so they were driving slow and looking for somewhere safe to pull over and wait out the storm. They saw a bunch of lights on the road coming towards them, and assuming it was emergency vehicles, they pulled over to the side of the road to let them pass. The next thing they know, an officer tapped on their window, waking them all up and asking them to move along. They were kind of confused, but they just kind of brushed it off, thinking that maybe they had just decided to sleep where they were rather than continue driving through the blizzard and whatnot. except when they started looking around, there was no snow. No sign whatsoever of the storm, in fact, and they stopped at a gas station and my grandma said something to the attendant about the storm, and he didn't say anything but looked at her like she was crazy. They got back on the road and were home at evening, and when they got home, my great-grandma was in a panic, asking them what the hell had happened to them. Because apparently it had been 10 days since my great-grandpa called to say that they were heading home. They all have an entire week missing, and they all have no idea what happened to them or where they were during that week.